Hello and welcome to tonight's live stream. My name's Les from Digital Creations, the producer of tonight's show. Great guest on tonight, as you've seen by the banner. So I've just got to do a little bit of housekeeping here, and I've got to say thanks everybody for all the support in the previous weeks and months that we've been running. It's been great to get that, and we've had some great comments about the live streams. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go through the chat and see who's in tonight's chat. We've got Deborah Singleton who's doing the moderating tonight. Welcome to the show, Deborah, and thanks for moderating. Alison Buttle, Alex Wingfield, let's have a look. Ian Green 9, Maxu, and I'll have to scroll up a little bit. Tim Brennan, welcome to the show, Tim. And yeah, so we're going to roll. We're going to roll with our intro. See you in a bit. Well, there we have it. Another great show tonight. Welcome everybody for joining us on the Truth Proof live stream. Without further ado, it's over to Paul to introduce tonight's guest.
Thank you very much, Les. And another week has soon come round, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking tonight to Whitley Strieber. And I think for those that don't know the name in the subject of the unexplained and the paranormal, then you must have been living under a stone, because the guy's renowned the world over for his own experiences and the brilliant work that he does. Writer of over 40 books, fiction and non-fiction, but more importantly to our audience, the benchmark, the book Communion. But before we speak about any of that, welcome, Whitley.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. It's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. I mean, I've spoken on your Dreamland podcast quite a few times in the past, and you've always been brilliant with me. And
yeah, I've enjoyed my listeners enjoy you very much. You're a great guest.
But you know, obviously, tables turned slightly tonight, and it's great. And before we speak about your experience, which I know that you'll have spoke about many, many times, but I mean, some of our listeners might not have heard it. Could we jump to the kind of early years, Whitley?
Sure.
The 1950s, childhood, and any family members had experiences? What put you on this road? We know that Communion and that experience in 1985 was the start of it. I would have thought primarily, but was there things happening before then?
I don't know. I've been back and forth about that for years. There are indications that things happened in my childhood, and that wouldn't be unusual. The close encounter experience has a tendency to be something that starts early in the lives of most people who have it. I had, when I was having a hypnosis with the psychiatrist, Dr. Donald Klein, in March of 1986, covering the experience I had had the previous December, which was a close encounter experience. And Dr. Klein was a professional, among other things, a psychiatrist and a very skilled forensic hypnotist with proof of the effectiveness of his work, in that he had solved, at that point in his career, 72 criminal cases using his forensic hypnosis to help people remember things like license plate numbers and hit and run accidents and things like that. So he was very, very skilled. And during the hypnosis session, I suddenly reverted back to the age of 12. And this was because of the fact that the trauma that I was experiencing in my memories of what happened in December of 85 was similar to the buried trauma I had experienced at the age of 12 in 1957. This astonished me. It was completely unexpected. And it sent me on a quest over my childhood to try to determine if this had happened before, because the possibility, of course, existed that the the stress was the same. I felt the same sort of stress, but that what had happened in my childhood was some more conventional kind of upset. And an author called Edward Conroy, who wrote a book about me called Report on Communion, went into my childhood deeply by interviewing friends and childhood friends, and most of them did remember things that would suggest that this had happened to me in my childhood. But uh, I had very few direct memories. Some. Uh, However, that's not unusual either. My own son, who I saw being engaged with the visitors at times in the late 80s when he was a 7-year-old child, nowadays remembers nothing of it whatsoever, even though he wrote down uh, descriptions of what was happening to him, and I actually saw it, some of it. So it's possible for there to be complete amnesia, childhood amnesia about these things, I suppose. But I do think that things happened to me as a child, yes.
And you know, the childhood friends that were interviewed, did they recall you saying things that were suggestive of possible interaction?
Yeah, the mother of a friend with whom I used to have sleepover parties said that I would sometimes say that I had to go home because the spacemen were going to get me.
Yeah, and you've no recollection of that? No.
No, and no, none. However, there is one thing I do recall very much no, excuse me, I'm misspeaking myself. There's another thing that a friend recalled, and that was one of the incident that I remembered during the hypnosis session in 1986. The childhood incident involved, among other things, seeing soldiers lying on cots or tables in a big room, and this strange figure with great big black eyes moving among them. And the soldiers were human soldiers, and they were all asleep. Um, and one of my friends, Michael Ryan, told Mr. Conroy that he recalled me coming back from that trip and talking about all of the soldiers I had seen. And there were no soldiers in other words, we went to a home in Wisconsin, and then we went to do some horseback riding, and we spent some time in a cabin on a lake. We didn't go anywhere near any military facilities at all,
No.
nor did we see any soldiers. But I told him about what happened, what I saw under these unusual circumstances, apparently.
That's so interesting, because I'm speak for myself now, but I've recently met up with a childhood friend. We've reconnected after over 30 years, and he now knows that I've written Night People, and we were friends from being infant school to probably late teens, just about 20-year-old, and then life just takes you in different directions. But he remembers me talking about things when I was a young boy that I don't remember. So that's the reason I sort of asked that question, and I found it fascinating. This guy, Adrian Kirby, they call him. I don't, anybody can look him up. I'm always finding ways to try and validate myself, because I've no proof of anything that I'm talking about apart from this profound experience. But when you said that after being interviewed, your friends were saying things that you don't remember, I can quite relate
Yes.
to that. So really interesting. Thank you. And I don't know if there's anything else to add before we get to December the 26th, 1985.
Well, there is one other childhood experience that I've remembered all my life. And it was one of those memories that sort of just didn't make sense. Didn't seem like a dream, but I just assumed it was. I have no idea whether or not it was in fact a dream. It is being on a thing like one of those inflatable life rafts, and it's dark blue, and there are these little men in it running around, and there are a bunch of children on it, and we're all hanging over the edge because we can see the neighborhood below us, and the men are very nervous because they're afraid we'll fall off, and they keep trying to pull us back. And that's I always assumed some sort of a dream, but it's a memory that I've had in my mind all of my adult life. I mean, for years and years. So
It's
uh,
strange
it's
for it to remain so powerful in your memory. You
yeah,
know,
exactly. Why would
yeah,
I remember something a childhood dream that's after all seems rather a trivial one all of this time?
yeah,
Now I think maybe it actually happened.
yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, one day maybe something just might trigger and flood a few more memories. But
Who knows? The same might happen to you.
well, I've tried. I've tried writing Night People, Whitley. I thought by documenting all these experiences from childhood to when they kind of stopped in about 1998, I was going to say 94. They sort of started again in 94 to 98. I would have had some kind of revelation, but I haven't done. You know, there's just little cameos of events that I can't move on from. But December 26, 1985. And it must be as vivid in your mind now as what it was when the memories were there from the
Right. Oh, yes. A day that shall live not in infamy, but in peculiarity.
I'm sure.
I At the time it happened, I was just I'll tell you exactly what the way the sequence of events was this. We went to bed on the night of December the 26th, 20, yeah, it was the 25th. So this really
25th,
would have been in the early morning of the 27th. But in any case, we went to bed perfectly normally. We'd had a nice post-Christmas dinner of goose and the usual fixings, sort of a after Christmas dinner. And it had been a very pleasant Christmas, our son's 7th year, and unexpectedly, the Christmas toys I had bought had mostly worked, although I recall the little steam engine exploded. But that's a whole part of my family life that we don't need to get into right now. We have notoriously dangerous Christmases. It's a long tradition. It goes back way back into the family. In any case, his Christmas had been successful. And we had a very lovely evening, and then we went to bed early, and there was a disturbance in the night. And I woke up the next morning quite uneasy and trying to figure out what had happened. And I decided that there must have been an owl had gotten into the house because I could remember seeing these enormous eyes moving around. And my wife Annie she pointed out that no owl could get in the house because the windows were all closed and we didn't have a fireplace for anything to come down the chimney, and the wood stove, which had a chimney, was burning. I mean, nothing could have gotten in. And I remembered that evening as the sun dropped, I went up to where I then decided that there was had been an owl sitting on the windowsill of our bedroom window. And I recall going upstairs in the evening as the sun was setting and looking out on that sill and seeing there were no tracks on it at all. And it sent a real chill down my spine because I was if there was no owl at all, something was wrong with me. The idea of aliens never even crossed my mind, not for another couple of months, because, you don't think about that. I hadn't thought about it at all since I suppose we were mildly interested in flying saucers when we were little boys, because that was
Yeah.
all over the newspapers in the 50s. But it wasn't something I thought about. If you'd asked me at that time what I thought about flying saucers, I would have said, uh, it's something to do with the people who see them. It's nothing to do with the real world. But then the next couple of days, I began to suffer pain. I got an injury in my temple. There was an injury, a red mark, and I could remember something happening to me. And then my anus was damaged, and it was quite painful. And I thought to myself, could somebody have gotten in here and attacked me? Is that why I'm beat up, basically?
Yeah.
And so I went to the doctor. He said that this mark on my head looked like a little spider bite. But he then said to me, Whitley, you do understand that you've been raped? I said, no, doctor, I don't. I don't have any memory whatsoever of anything like that happening to me. And I thought to myself, you'd remember that, fella.
Yeah.
And his examination showed that there was a tear there, and I had been roughly treated. And I was at a loss. I couldn't imagine. But then I began to remember these odd little figures, and I thought to myself, somebody has drugged me and attacked me. I've been the victim of a crime, and I didn't even know it. And, I was a pretty famous writer at the time, and eh, I had the idea that somebody had not liked some of my writing and had done this to me.
Yeah.
So I tried to engage with the Criminal Investigation Division of New York State Police, but they were unable to help me because there was no evidence except the injury itself. They were very sweet about it, but they said, in the absence, we don't know where to look for fingerprints or anything. We don't know, you're not telling us anything that can help us begin a case. So uh, I became very distraught. The doctor helped me by ordering a MRI scan of my brain, because he wasn't concerned really about a brain tumor, but I was, because as he put it, you don't get raped by brain tumors. But I was
No.
because I wasn't telling him all this stuff that I
Uh,
was beginning to remember.
I'm sorry for cutting across your story, because we do want to hear it all. But by this time, had you already got little flashbacks coming back of things that you didn't
Yeah,
understand?
I did.
Yeah.
And they were impossibly ridiculous. They were flashbacks of little creatures of flipping around that were big black eyes, and some of them were dark blue, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, no one could have that. I mean, it couldn't be real. And so what in the world had happened to me? Because the rape was very real.
Yeah.
But the memories made no sense. So I finally I sat down with the doctor. I told him exactly what I remembered. And he says to me, "Well, Whitley, you're telling me you think you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men." And I thought, "Holy God, that is what it sounds like." And I said, "Tom, I'm at a loss." He said, "Well, why don't we get into this? Because one thing is very clear. Two things are very clear. One is there's been a physical injury, and two, you're very distraught. You're very distressed." So I ended up taking a whole bank of tests, about stress levels and psychological state. And I took a test for a disease called temporal lobe epilepsy that can cause vivid hallucinations. I did that at my insistence because he didn't think it was necessary, because he was already pretty much fixed on some kind of criminal assault thing, because he kept going back to the physical injuries. And everything turned out normal. The MRI scan was normal. The temporal lobe epilepsy test showed that I had a normal brain and no sign whatsoever of any seizure, any tendency towards seizure of any kind. And the psychological tests revealed a very bright man who was basically a normal man. I mean, no paranoia or anything like, but there was a high level of stress, which we already knew. And
How,
at that, sometime during that period, I read a book my brother sent me for Christmas, called Science and the UFOs by Jenny Randalls, a British author. And in the book, it's the first book about UFOs I ever remember reading. And I don't really know why I even picked it up. But when I saw it, I thought, from my brother, I thought another joke. My brother's a big joker. And I thought another joke, instead of a Christmas present, I get a Christmas joke. Okay. Next year I'll send him a tarantula or something. In any case, I read the book and I'm paging through it. And I know that in the back of my mind was the thought at this point that maybe these little creatures had been real. And I get toward the end of the book, and there's a description of something very similar to what happened to me. And it mentions a researcher called Bud Hopkins, who happens to live 3 blocks from us in New York. So I call him up. Ann and I go over there. I tell him my story. And he says, "You do understand this now. You've been abducted by aliens." And I thought, what a crock. But I humored him, because I really couldn't explain it to myself at all. But I thought that explanation was absurd. And then he introduced me to Dr. Klein, who was the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry, one of the leading practitioners of that profession in the world, and an expert, as I said earlier, forensic hypnosis. And it all fell together from there. And I fell apart at the same time.
I would imagine that's the words for it, fall apart. How did your wife feel when because obviously you must have confided, you told the doctor, and you will have confided, I would imagine, in a few people that you trusted implicitly.
Yeah.
So what was her reaction then when you started to unravel this story? This experience, not story, this experience.
When I got this story together in my head, I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Because I had been fighting with Anne. I thought that I was going insane. I thought I was having a psychosis. I was going to get into a psychosis state. I was trying to get her, I was pushing her away. I was trying to get her to divorce me. And the reason was that if I had become psychotic and ended up institutionalized, and anyone with a psychosis is totally impenetrable as that my memories were, they seemed real, would end up in an institution, she wouldn't be able to divorce me. And there she'd be with a little boy to raise and no husband to support them. So then I thought, well, I've been trying to push her away and I love her dearly. I just is crazy about her. And I thought, at least I don't have to worry about that part of it anymore. Now all I have to do is somehow get past telling her I was apparently abducted by aliens. And how are we going to do this? So I went to a friend, Timothy Greenfield Saunders. And Timothy and I have been friends for a while. And he is a very open guy and very bright. And I told him the story. And I said, I don't know how to tell Anne. And he said, just tell her. Anne's going to roll with it. You know what Anne is like. Anne's a very curious, open person. She's very bright and she'll roll with it. And so I sat her down and I said, "Honey, I've got something to tell you." And she was very worried because she thought I was going to say, excuse me, uh, I, it's time for you to separate from me. But instead, I told her this story and she looked at me and then she said, "Oh, thank God. I thought you were going crazy."
And did any pennies drop with her from the night that it happened? Were there any kind of
No,
awareness or recollection?
nothing, nothing, except she did remember there was some kind of a ruckus in the house. She did remember that very clearly, that she had been dimly aware, and it didn't wake her up, but she had been dimly aware of a lot of talking and movement. And she actually said at one point that I had the feeling that there was a party in the house. And I said, a good party or a bad party? She said, "Oh, not a good party."
All right.
And she repeated that under hypnosis with Dr. Robert Naiman. Um, but I, you know, I, you know, we rolled with it. The relationship, we didn't have, now that we didn't have this stressor in our relationship anymore, we became closer than ever. And Anne just took everything over immediately. I mean, Anne was very smart and very kind of in your face type of person. And when she realized that this was real on some level, I mean, she was into it, reading, talking to people. We went to meetings with other people at Bud Hopkins's house. Annie led the way from then on. And when we decided to write a book, the book's written by me, but the inspiration was definitely Anne.
Right. Well, do you think if you hadn't have written it, she would have gone forward and written and penned something about these experiences? Because obviously she'd enough faith in you to know that the story was true. You were telling.
Well, enough faith in me to know that what I was telling her was an accurate description of my memories. But
Yeah.
let's be very careful. There's a difference between that and a true story.
Hmm.
We can't know whether something like that is a reflection of actual physical experiences as they happened. And the reasons are two. The first one is traumatic situations affect the mind's ability to remember things correctly. Now, this is why people so often, if they're in a car accident or a plane accident or something, have absolutely no memory of it. And in this case, I had some memories. But the other problem is when something is a totally novel experience, when you are seeing things and experiencing things that you have no relationship to anything else in your experience, your mind gets into trouble making sense of it because the brain is basically a relational database. When you're looking at something at all times, the brain is always pulling in more information from its memory banks
Yep.
than it is from the optic nerves. The memory banks are more active than the optic nerves. And that's because it's all relational. And if there's nothing to relate, things go off. You don't know what to make of what you're seeing.
Would I be right in saying then that, although we can't prove this, but that's why you perceived that you saw owls, because you're relating to something with huge dark eyes?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Precisely. People see owls, they see deer,
Well, do
and
you know,
they
Whitley, I saw cow's eyes. There were a pasture at the back of us as a child, and when they were in the room and in these silver grey curtains that my mum had got, and I could see these eyes like huge apple pips, and I thought they were cow's eyes.
well, exactly. So that you've apparently had this experience in your past.
Yeah, yeah, without
Yeah.
a doubt. And yeah, it's fascinating. And is there more to add to that, or were there more experiences at the cabin?
Oh, many.
Yeah.
Maybe
Do
many,
you want to
because
relate any of those to us, please?
sure. Well, once I realized that this was all real, that it had actually happened, and that these beings were unidentifiable. I didn't necessarily think of them as aliens. I didn't know what they were. But I did know this, they were remarkable. And I decided I would try to re-engage with them somehow. And I talked about it with Annie, and she said to her, I said, "Do you think I should do this?" And she said, "Well, I think you almost have to, because this is one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard of happening to anybody. You have to try to see it through and see what's going on." I said, "Well, what I'm planning to do is to go out into the woods where I think they took me from in the first place at night, to indicate I'm ready for more interaction." And she said, "I think that makes a lot of sense." I said, "Well, will you come with me?" She said, "Of course not." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, for one thing, our little boy is here. We can't leave him in the house by himself. And for another thing, this is your problem, not mine." And so I went out on my own, and I'm telling you, it was scary. It was terribly scary. I never met them out there. In other words, there was never a moment when I went out in the woods and they came down from above and there they were. But they began to come back to the house. Like I started this in February of 19 in late February, early March of 1986. And in uh, the middle of the month, we were up there with my son and a little friend of his, a little 7-year-old girl. They were school friends. And I had already told the parents that this stuff was happening. And all the parents were they just didn't care. They laughed it off. They were much more interested in having a weekend without their kids than worrying about alien contact. So um, she was there, and she suddenly says at dinner, she says, "A little airplane covered with lights just went through the front yard." And this is from a 7-year-old child, and the children, understand, know nothing of this.
No.
Our little boy, no, we had no he didn't hear any discussion of this or anything. We were very careful about that. So, I called her father and said she had seen this, and she knew anything about flying saucer or anything like that. And he says, "Flying what?" And I thought, "Nope, she doesn't know a thing about it." And that night was the first time they came back, and they came into the bedroom in the middle of the night. Uh, in response to my going out in the woods, they were saying, "Yes, we're ready to do this. We'll do this with you."
How did you communicate in the woods? Via the mind, or were you audibly asking
I would just
questions?
sit and meditate. I have do a meditation I learned in the Gurdjieff Foundation, which is a foundation based that works with the ideas of an Armenian mystic called George Gurdjieff. Uh, and one of the things you do is you work with your attention, and you will try to split your attention and hold it on part of it onto your body while you are engaging in the world around you, and it broadens your focus very beautifully. Actually, I've been in the foundation for now nearly 60 years. So I was in the foundation, and I would do that exercise out in the woods. And I later found out from the visitors that when you do this, it makes you visible to them. In other words, it sets up a glow in your body that they can see. And that was why they came to me in the first place. I didn't know that, of course. I mean, who would?
No.
Uh, but so I was doing that, and they noticed this and came. They sort of adopted me, and I've been with them ever since.
So these secondary encounters, the first ones must have been when it started happening, it must have been frightening due to the trauma that you suffered originally.
Oh God, they were frightening beyond belief. because it's just not something you expect.
Mm.
I mean, it's like waking up one night and suddenly the Spanish Inquisition walks into your bedroom. You're just not expecting this. This is not you don't expect it. And I didn't expect it. But once I realized it was real, well, I wanted to go for it. I wanted to learn more and to make it my own. I mean, it was my life after all. And
Yeah.
if I walked away from this, I would wonder for the rest of my life, what the hell is that about? And instead, I went toward it, and it has been a tremendous life experience. It's going on right now. I mean, it's I'm in contact all the time. In fact, there's a carrier wave in this apartment. Uh, I'm going to show you this in a minute. This little radio
Okay.
is tuned to a frequency of 144.1 megahertz, which I don't know what it is if it's used in the UK, but in the United States, it's a virtually unused frequency. And you don't generally hear a thing on this frequency. Frequency mode. Of course. So it's not doing anything. This usually it's receiving on this frequency, and maybe I'll just leave it on. Maybe it'll start to receive later in
Okay.
the show. But generally, it's always receiving on that frequency in this apartment until I want to demonstrate it, and then it's silent.
Well, these things happen. Do you think, Whitley, that they understood the stress that they placed on you initially? Do they
Uh,
understand emotion?
I don't think so. I don't think that they expected it. I don't think they expected me to panic because they were having a lot of trouble with me. They were pretty upset in there, and they had this voice that kept saying, "What can we do to help you stop screaming? What can we do to help you stop screaming?" And one of my neighbor's sons, who was 18, saw a UFO, a brightly colored lit UFO in the uh, area nearby that same night. And then a year later, his dad came over and said, Whitley, uh, he and his wife were coming back from a party at 2 o'clock in the morning the night after Christmas. So, obviously a late party. And they saw what they thought was a blimp in a field near our houses down in the field. And, at 2 o'clock in the morning, a blimp hanging in a field. He was a retired state policeman. And so, he felt an obligation to stop and see what was wrong. And he went out into the field. And as he walked toward the blimp, he could hear screaming. And he began to run toward it, whereupon lights flashed on all over it and started making a growling noise and coming toward him. And that scared him. And he jumped back over the fence and got in his car, and they drove off. And he said a year later, he said, Whitley, I'm very ashamed because my guess is it was you in there, and I could have helped you and I didn't. And I said to him, you were very wise to
Yeah.
get out of there because you don't know what would have happened, and neither do I.
No, it could have been fatal. But did you say growling noise?
It made a
Really?
noise. It was something that was designed to scare him off.
Well, I suppose, yeah, once again, something we can relate to in a way,
Yeah.
really. We hear a growling noise and we associate we're going to get bit or something not quite pleasant's going to happen. What do you think they are, Whitley? Do you think they're an alien, demon? What?
I don't know.
No.
Let me see. Wait a minute. I have this implant here. It usually will. Yeah. It's exceptionally quiet today. That's very unusual.
Because it will click, will it? It will.
Oh, it goes crazy normally. We got it on video, and there's going to be a documentary about me in the US in a few weeks where it just goes. At one point, there are two radios going at the same time, and in a radio propagating it the way it does, the two signals should be identical on the two radios, and they're side by side, and it's not identical.
I see. That's
so. Anyway, maybe it'll start up later. I don't know. Sometimes it's.
Do you want to talk about the implant or?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
This is I'm touching it now. It was put in my ear in May of 1989 by two people. They came. The cabin was locked up. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I was reading in bed. The windows were open because it was a warm May evening. The alarm system was armed, and uh, the we I suddenly heard gravel crunching in the driveway below the bedroom window, which scared me because there was no car lights, one, and two, there was a big gate so people couldn't get in there. And yet there was a vehicle in there. I had a shotgun under the bed and a pistol in the bedside table, and I started to go for the shotgun. But then or rather, excuse me, I started to go for there was also floodlights around the house, and I started to go for the switches that would turn on all the floodlights. And um, as I turned, I saw two people standing in the room at the foot of the bed. You could see them very clearly from the glow of the LED on the alarm system beside the bed. And so I started to go for the shotgun instead. I saw the people were a man and woman, and at the same time, I heard a voice in the backyard say very quietly, "Condition red." And I, instead of getting to the shotgun, I ended up lying on my side with my eyes blacked out. I couldn't see anything, and someone pressing my head against the pillow, and the woman's voice speaking very softly and gently, and saying something like, "Woody, we're not going to hurt you, and this is a blessing," and things like that. And um, a gift to you. And then, they left, and I grabbed the pistol and went running through the house, trying to find a breach somewhere in the system because a window or something that had been opened. And I couldn't find a breach, and the alarm system was still red. It was still what hadn't rung or anything. So I decided it must have been some sort of bizarre dream, although it sure didn't feel like one. And I spent, the rest of the night sort of half asleep.
Was Anne in the same room?
Yeah, and she did not she didn't notice this. The next morning, it turned out that not only that there had been a breach, but I hadn't seen it. Now, what it was a major breach. The garage door was wide open and the system was still armed. And so I called the alarm guy, and he comes over and says, "There's a powerful magnetic field in the area of the garage door, which is so powerful that the two magnets don't know they've been separated, even though they were about 3 feet apart." And he said, "I don't know what could generate this magnetic field. There's nothing we have that could do that, and our systems are not nearly that powerful. So all I can do is replace the switches." And he did, and it worked fine after that. But I knew someone had come in. It was real, and
Yeah.
that they'd been in this stuff because we don't we don't make free floating magnetic fields. In fact, that just became a scientific reality last year. We haven't been able to do that before. Uh, so then a couple days later, the ear began to hurt, and I felt this bump in it, and I thought, "Holy moly, an alien implant." Because I already knew about them at this point.
Oh
By
gosh, yeah, yeah.
1989, I'd even been witness to the removal of one. And so my immediate thought was, I want to get rid of it. But Annie said, "Don't do that. Let's see what it does." And I said, "It's in my ear. Would you do it? Would you leave it in if it was in your ear?" She said, "Whitley, I would." She was very firm about it. So I did. And then a few years later, after we lost the cabin because of sales dropping, because people just did not believe me, um, we moved to Texas, which is my hometown, and met a doctor, and I said to the doctor, you know, I'd like to get this thing, little cyst removed. And he said, sure. Anne was furious.
Did you confide in him what you thought it was?
No, I
No.
didn't tell him a thing. However, what he didn't say was he had read Communion. He knew who I was. And when it came time to remove it, he goes in, it's all on videotape on my website. Anne is there, and he goes in and he makes a little incision here behind the ear, and he sees a white disc, which proceeds to move down into my earlobe down here. And he can't take it out because, you know, he'd have to take off my whole ear. The thing escaped. And things don't do that. I mean, it's just, you know, a natural object isn't going to do like that. So he closes it up, and I go home. And the day after that, I feel a burning in the ear, and it comes back up to where it is now. For the next many years, I just leave it there. Doesn't seem to, occasionally it'll turn on and the ear gets bright red. That happened with, I was studying implants with Dr. William Mallow, who was the head of materials research at the Southwest Materials Science at the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. And of course, he wanted to get it taken out and couldn't. They got when the doctor was touching it with his scalpel before it moved down, they got a little fragment of it, and Dr. Mallow got a hold of that, and a lab technician said it was a metallic fragment that had motile proteinaceous cilia on it. In other words, there were cilia on it that would move, and that would be what was able to repel it under the skin. But the bulk of it is still here. And so one day I was with Dr. Mallow, and my ear would turn bright red every once in a while, and you'd hear a sort of a shh sound. And we were talking in his office about it, and it happened. It turned on, and the ear turns bright red. And he says, "Oh my God, let's get into the signals acquisition lab. They have a big signals acquisition lab because they do a lot of work for the intelligence community." So we went running into the lab, and they tried to get a signal from it, and they succeeded. Only the lab is classified, and therefore they couldn't tell me anything about it. So I thought, you know, it's my brain, my thing, and they can tell me, yes, we got a signal, but we can't tell you about it.
It's a wonder they didn't want to remove your ear and keep the implant.
Well, yeah, well, they didn't do that. I wouldn't let that happen. Anyway, years later, about 3 years ago, I was at the San Antonio Book Fair as a guest of the book fair. That was before they realized they put 2 and 2 together and threw me out. I don't get to go to the book fair anymore because the Communion Man is not respected enough author, even though I'm probably Texas's most famous living author at the moment. Yeah. I don't get invited. In any case, I did get invited then. And I'm sitting there doing my thing, signing books. These 2 guys walk up and say, "Mr. Strieber, we were involved in the acquisition of the signal from your implant." And they said a couple of things that told me that they knew about the lab. Whether they were actually involved or not is another story. One of them says, "We just wanted to let you know it is the strangest signal that has ever been picked up in that laboratory, and it is still under study." And they turned around and walked out.
Some kind of confirmation of
really something, yeah. But it's a big story, the story of the implant.
And you know, the people that put this in, or the beings that put this in, because they can't have been people in the sense that we would perceive, surely, because there's no way that they could have penetrated the property and done than
You're
what they
wrong
did.
there. There are people working in this. There are definitely people working in this.
Yeah,
People,
right.
you and me.
Really, do you know that's something that's kind of interests me a little bit. Just moving on, obviously your story's paramount, but if there are people working in this, Whitley, that can do what they're doing, and that we don't have to go deep into war zones and things like that, but why aren't they using it for other purposes? As in, you
That's a
know,
great question. That is my central question. Uh, why is this so hidden?
yeah,
Why why does the government keep it secret, for God's sakes? I mean, the Roswell incident, in 1947 happened. I know that because one of my uncles, one of my father's brothers, was involved in analyzing the debris that was brought to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. And after I published Communion, he told me what he had done, and his commanding officer, Arthur Exon, had actually held the bodies in his hand and told me about this. It happened.
yeah.
It happened. But what in the world is the secrecy about? That they could not explain, and no one can, but it's
Do,
there.
well,
And
could it be a knowledge that once they've been given this knowledge by these higher intelligences, that it's just something that just can't be spoken about? I mean, that's a
of course it could.
simplified explanation, but I mean, there's something holding things back. You're telling me, and I've no reason to disbelieve you. Honestly, I mean, some experiences I've had, I can kind of believe most things, from genuine people. But you're telling me that these were real people, and no
They
reason to
look like
disbelieve that,
people.
really. But why aren't we using this technology, these methods then, to settle conflicts in other parts of the world? Which should we say right now? It's
Good question. Well, like the
sorry.
implant, I've learned to use the implant, and it's a wonderful tool. I couldn't be without it. It's the best research tool in the world. All you have to do if you're doing research and you need something, is think about it, and that will fall into your hands within 24 hours, no matter what it is. Give you an
So
example. Go ahead.
no, so the implant, do you think it's a way that these other beings are using to track you, to keep tabs on you, or do you think it's
Why would
a gift of
they?
sorts
They
to you then?
care about some old guy who goes to the grocery store every once in a while. They know where I am.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
track me.
So the purpose of it is what then? To aid you?
Well, I think so.
Yeah,
I think it is, as I say, I've now written 1, 2, 3, 4 books with it. And the research in these books is top drawer. It's the best. They're the best research books I've ever done, because of the implant. I'll
yeah,
give you an example. I was writing a novel called In Hitler's House, which was the idea is that a young German American meets Hitler in 1931, and he becomes sort of enamored of Hitler without understanding what's going to happen. But when he does realize this, he's become a friend of Hitler's, but he ends up as an Allied spy. And now the novel is written as a memoir. He's writing now in the 1970s his memoir of this. And if it's going to be believable as a memoir, every casual detail of life has to have verisimilitude. Now, so therefore, I have to find out intimate details about Hitler and his close associates, what they wore, what kind of pajamas they wore, brush their teeth. So I was thinking to myself, and this is when I was first learning to use the implant. How will I get anything about the private life of Hitler because he was so secretive? My I was sort of Googling around, and suddenly the Google turns into the German Google. And I'm thinking, I can't speak a word of German. So I click on a link because I can see the word Amazon on the link. And it goes to the German Amazon where there's a book that I do the Google Translate, and it's a book by one of Hitler's valets about all of his private life, you know, his toothbrushes and his suits. And I thought, by God, this is perfect. So I ordered the book and it comes. Of course, I didn't put two and two together. And when it does come, there it is. It's all in German. So I think to myself, I'm going to have to figure out how to get this translated. I go to a friend's house that night, and there's a woman there with a German accent. And I said, by the way, do you speak German? She said, of course I speak German. I am from Germany. I said, but listen, I've got a book, it's not long. Would you translate it for me? Of course, she said, just give it to me, bring it over. So I gave her the book. She translated it, and I had everything I needed. That wouldn't have happened by accident.
No, everything kind of fell into place.
Fell into place.
Yep.
And it does that all the time with this. Amazing. I mean, I was working on a book about the character of the visitors and their nature, and it's all based on what people have described in letters to us, because we got many thousands of letters, and they're now all in a archive at a university here in the States called Rice University in Houston, Texas. It's a very prestigious American university. But I was reading one of the letters, and I was thinking, I've got to see deeper into this. And it came together, and I understood the nature of the communication in that letter, what was actually being said to these people and being done with them. And it all has to do with using the implant. It's just I just wish more people had them.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Do you think people may have aren't aware of it?
Boy, it is a blessing.
Whitley, we're coming to top hour now, so we're going to have a few minutes if you want to get a drink or anything like that. And if possible, we'll speak a little bit more after and maybe answer some questions from our listeners. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll let Les just come in.
Okay, thank you, guys. Really, 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 really interesting show tonight. And thanks, Whitley, for coming on Truth Proof. We're going to run a couple of advertisements. 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
Join the stellar lineup of renowned speakers and TV personalities at the Awakening Expo, June 24th to 26th, 2022, Blackpool, UK, featuring Eric von Daniken, Giorgio A. Tsoukalos, Andrew Collins, Steve Mera, Billy Carson, Dr. Teresa Bullard-Wyke, Johnny Enoch, Paul Sinclair, Maria Wheatley, Andrew Goff, Barry Fitzgerald, Hugh Newman, and Richard Doty. Immerse yourself in 3 days of mind-blowing presentations, Q&As, panels, meet your favorite speakers, and much, much more at the Awakening Expo, June 24th to 26th, 2022, Blackpool, UK. Get your tickets now at awakeningufo.com.
Back. Before we get to the questions, there's just one thing I've sort of noted while you were talking earlier. And well, for me, it was quite telling, being such a prolific author and an author that's written books that have been turned into blockbuster films. And you said that you're no longer invited to sign books at, I forget the place that you did
San
tell.
Antonio Book Fair, my hometown.
So how hard has it been then to bridge the world of, say, fiction and your real life encounter, non-fiction? How difficult has that been to deal with?
It's horribly difficult. People don't want this to be true. They feel intimidated by it or frightened or both. And they don't want it to be true. And they don't want me around because it's very hard to walk away from me and think he's lying, because I'm not. And any fool can see that. If I may not be able to tell you exactly what is happening, but something that is unknown definitely is happening. And they don't want that.
I would say without a doubt, I would absolutely fully agree with what you're saying. And
you must come across that in your own work.
Yeah, but it's not just that, Whitley. You don't actually need to say that communion is a true story. Everything was there. Your writing credentials were there before communion. You've not done yourself any favors by writing communion, really. But it's your truth. Sure. It's your truth.
Well, so, I became a pariah,
which is a difficult one to deal with. I just noted you'd said it, and obviously you rolled with other things because we were talking about the implant, but I thought I just don't want to leave on that, because I think it's quite telling of you that, you know, you have come forward and you've told your truth at a cost.
Right. Quite a cost. Try being the son of the communion man. When he was a teenager, he said, "Dad, you know, you really are the most embarrassing father in the world." He was right.
Right. On that note, then, and I've got 4 girls, you know, and they roll their eyes odd times at me, so I do know. Let's have a think. Questions, Les. And is your microphone on, my friend?
It is, sir. It is. And thank you very much for the reminder. I've got a few questions on my pad here, Whitley. If I can go through some of them, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay, so thanks for all your questions tonight in the chat. Some great questions come through. The first one is from Andy Ross, Ghost Whisperer. What does Whitley think of the said link between blood types or DNA and abductions?
I don't think there's a known connection. I have the most common blood type there is, O plus, I think it is. And I don't think, I think that whole business of blood types it's not real. There may be something about brains, but not blood types.
Wow, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Justin Apple. Whitley, how accurate was the communion film?
The communion film wasn't very accurate, except in one respect. The emotional impact of the experience, especially on Anne and on our son, was accurate. But you have to read the book for the story. I never danced with them, and it wasn't really like that very much. It was different.
Did any parts of the film annoy you after then, how it had been portrayed? Or
well, you know, they took my script and sort of put it into a shredder and made a movie. I don't think they had much respect for me. I think if I hadn't been standing over them and had a role as a producer, they probably would have made it into a comedy. Okay. A joke about me. And Chris Walken tried to, with all that business of having the camera on himself and everything. I can't even use those cameras, let alone I'm not a he was trying to communicate that I'm unnaturally self-involved, because his idea was that only a complete narcissist would come up with something like this. I don't even
Unfortunately,
talk about it anymore.
no, that's fine. I would say, unfortunately, there's thousands upon thousands of other people coming up with similar stories now. Thanks to you being brave enough and other people like you. But next question, Les, please.
Yes, thanks for the question, Justin Apple. Rick Allen is asking, and I think you've touched on this earlier, Whitley. Does he think he was chosen randomly or taken on purpose?
It wasn't random. I don't know why it happened in my life. I've got some ideas, but since it came from childhood, I've noticed something that families who, military families, for example, when a person is in the military and they have some kind of encounter, then it ends up in their family. And that may have happened in my family because my father was very secretive, but he was somehow involved, I think. And his brother was certainly involved in the Roswell incident. And I think that's how I ended up being involved as a child. And then they came back when I was an adult. And that's not unusual either. And started a relationship that's still going on. I don't think it's random, though. I don't think it's random.
Okay, Rick Allen is asking another question. Did Whitley ever ask them why he was sexually assaulted?
I didn't have the chance, and it's not like that. But the removal of semen from my body haunts me, because that was the life I was given by God to transmit into this world. And they took some of it. And I have no idea what they did with it. I don't know if there were children or not. And if there were, then I am the opposite of an orphaned child. I am an orphaned father. And the mother, if they used an egg of a woman that they took that from, is an orphaned mother.
Never looked at it like that, Whitley. You know, and that troubles you. I can tell you're speaking about it. That it's not comfortable. It doesn't think.
I mean, I care about my children deeply, and if I have children that I have no access to, it matters to me immensely.
Yeah. Thank you. Just before we move on to the next question, Les, do the visitors, do you think that they recognize what we think of as God?
I basically have no idea.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, Whitley. Umbraman is asking, did Anne interact with the same beings as Whitley, and how did she perceive them?
She didn't ever interact with them directly. There was one time when she did, but there was a lot of interaction at the cabin, but not with Anne, with other people. There were people, in fact, whole groups of people have interacted with them at the same time. So it was, there's a lot of that going on. We had a group of them, and they weren't aliens. I think they were human beings in some other form. There's a lot about this world we don't know about where we are and what we're actually doing. In any case, they were coming every night to the cabin, and they could be invisible. But they were noisy, they'd bang around and you'd hear them in there. And in particular in the meditation room I was meditating in, and you couldn't see them, but it was like being in a room full of people you couldn't see. You could hear them breathing and moving around, and cats reacted to them as if they were, other people in the house. They didn't even bother the cats. Anyway, Annie decided she wanted to come meditate with them. And she came into the meditation room, and when these invisible friends would show up, and the room was obviously full of people, you could feel it. And she suddenly says, "Well, actually, I'm not ready." And she walked out. That's the closest she ever got to it.
And this was something that you could feel, obviously, like you said, you couldn't see it. Do you know?
Well, only once I asked when it started first happening, and I could feel the room was full of people. The cats got up and went out, and I thought, I can't. Obviously, no one could meditate under these circumstances. So I said, I have to see you, or I'm going to leave the room, because I mean, it was creepy, frankly. I don't know what they were. It was just what it was, and so nothing happened, and I left and went to bed. In the middle of the night, the typical way I would be waked up by the visitors would be to punch me on the shoulder. Someone punches me on the shoulder. I, of course, immediately wake up because this is now a familiar experience. And sitting on the foot of the bed is this man. It's a perfectly normal looking man, except for one thing. He's wearing a tunic rather than clothes. He's wearing like a Roman, not a toga, but a tunic. Like a long t-shirt that goes down to your knees. And I think to myself, is that for real? I mean, he's big as life. So I get out and I crawl down to the foot of the bed. I'm looking at him, and he looks at me. And I at that point, I had been taught by some of the medical people that I was working with at the time to always try to engage as many of my senses as I could when I was having one of these experiences. And that would help my brain put the experience together in a coherent way. So I could see this person. I couldn't hear him because there was no sound. So what else could I bring to bear? And that was my sense of smell. So I took his hand very gently, and he is a small, very soft hand, and I smelled his skin. And it turned out that he stank. He smelled like somebody who never bathed since the day one, and it shocked me, and I dropped his hand like that, and then he just sort of flipped out of existence. And I thought to myself, God, I realized they've showed me one of themselves. They've done what I asked to do. And that started this process of meditation. It went on for months. And they would wake me up at 3:00 in the morning to meditate. And it was wonderful fun. And they were so interesting because they would get involved in my mind and stuff. And then after Annie passed away, that was back in the 90s, that started to happen again, and it happens every night. It happened this morning at 3 a.m., in fact. They'll wake me up, and I go and sit and meditate. And it turns out that this has a very long history in human life. In some yoga traditions, it's called Brahma Muhurta time, the time of learning, when the mind is most open to these other levels of reality. And I use it. I work with them every night. I'm working on an introduction to a new edition of Communion, which is coming out in May. And I've been working on the introduction with them at night. And I did that this morning.
Have we got a particular hour here, Whitley? Would it be between 3 and 4 o'clock?
Well, traditionally, Brahma Muhurta time is about an hour and a half before sunrise. But they will generally wake me up between 3 and 4 o'clock if I don't wake myself up. And they have all kinds of ways of doing it. Some of them are very amusing, and some of them are rather intense. When it first started after Annie passed away, it involved, I was lying in bed. This was about a month after she passed away. and suddenly one of my toes felt like it was being electrified. In other words, like I'd stuck it in a light socket or something. And I leaped out of bed, of course, and I had long since forgotten about what had happened in the 90s. And I leap out of bed, and there's absolutely nothing in the bed. So of course, then I grab my phone and I'm looking up gout on Google. I've got an attack of gout, and there's no gout. It's not gout, obviously. So I don't connect anything. I go back to bed. The next night, somebody pinches my nipple real hard, grabs it, and he shakes it and pinches it. And I didn't just get out of bed. I shot up practically the ceiling. And I thought, oh God. And then I remembered, of course, it's the time they used to want me to get up and meditate with them. And so I started. And that was in September of 2015. I've done it every night since without fail. Either they will wake me up in all kinds of different ways, or I wake myself up. I do not use an alarm because I want the interaction.
And this then, Whitley, became more intense after Anne passed.
Yes, our dead have something to do with this.
Yeah, I've got to follow what you're telling me here, because I'm only just assuming, but do you think that was also a contributing factor? Maybe was your heightened emotional state as well? And I don't mean it weren't happening, but helping to enhance this process.
I don't know. I think it was opportunistic in the sense that I think Anne has a lot to do with it. I think Anne is really my teacher. I'm very close to Anne still. Anne, after Annie passed away, I was sitting in the living room. I was just bereft, as you may imagine, and the phone rang. I was saying, Annie, if there's anything left of you, please, please let me know. And the phone rang, and it was a friend of Anne's saying, Whitley, I just had the strangest thing happen. I heard Anne say in my mind to call you. And I thought, she knows Annie died. And I said, Belle, you knew Annie died at 7:15. And she said, oh my God, Whitley, I'm so sorry. No, I didn't know that. But she's not dead. She's still here. And that happened again and again over the next week and a half. All kinds of signs like that, including one friend in Tennessee calls me and says the same thing. I heard Annie's voice in my mind telling me to call Whitley. And again, I was sitting at this time in the woods up above Palm Springs, California, saying, Annie, if you're still here, please let me know. And then I remembered something. When she'd been working on all these letters, she walked out of her office one day and she said, Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death. Because so many people would write and say, we had these aliens come and my dead mother was with them and all this stuff again and again. And I thought, she's doing it. And I remembered we'd made a pact. The first one of us to die would come back if possible, but not to the other one, because neither of us would buy into that. I would assume it was on my imagination, and so would she. We would come back to friends who we never told about this pact. And she was doing it. And I thought, oh my God, and the pact, Anne's doing it. So that began this whole new level of this. Where not only these visitors, supposed aliens, it's our own dead too.
Yeah.
This is a much bigger thing than anyone understands.
It's profound. It really is. And so interesting that it's an added level of proof, the way that you're describing it. The friends coming back because it's something that you'd already talked about prior to anything happening. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, I'm very involved. She's with her, and I think that she uses the implant, and I can tell you exactly why I think that. Um, I was, uh, I was asking after she died. Let me explain this something here to make this make sense. When you look at a bright white surface through one eye, you can see a slit in it, and there's typed words racing through the slit very quickly. And that's something from the implant. I didn't know exactly what it was, but a doctor one of the brain doctors who studies the brains of us abductees, wanted to get a CAT scan of the implant. And obviously, whoever's involved thought to themselves, he's liable to get it removed because he probably knows the doctor would love to have it removed. And so 2 nights before I was due, to get the scan, there came a knock at the door at about 4 in the morning, a loud knock, but a certain type of knock that I know represents an unusual experience. I've heard it many times. So I rushed out there, of course, to open the door, because if you don't open the door immediately, then they're gone. So I jumped out of bed. They woke me right up. I jumped out of bed, opened the door, and there were these 2 men there, one of whom I've known from other incidents. This is a bigger thing in my life than you may realize. I've known him for years, and he's involved on their side of the fence. They came in, and they explained how the implant worked and what it was doing, and all those words that go past are actually material from my subconscious that's being brought forward, because we have extraordinary memory banks in us, and it's like a sort of a robotic muse that's coming forward. And he said that the implant had been designed by a man named, I thought he said Konstantin Rodive. And after they left, I Googled that name, and it turned out to be Konstantin Rodive, who was in his lifetime an expert in electronic voice phenomena. That is to say, the use of electronic devices to communicate between the living and the dead. And I was talking to an old friend and I was describing this implant to him, and the slit in the eye and everything. And he said, that's odd. I have a slit like that in my eye too, and I see the words racing through it, and I've never known why. And then it hit me. He is the world's leading expert on the work of Konstantin Rodive.
Amazing, right?
So Rodive gave him the same thing he gave me, only he never learned to use it, and I have.
It's fascinating. Do you know the slit? You call it a slit, but is the only you able to see this, Whitley?
Yeah. No one can see it. I went to the eye doctor. My eye doctor knows all about me, and he's always eager for these visits because he's hoping that something unusual will be discussed. And in this case, he looked in the eye in every possible way, and we couldn't see it. He couldn't see a thing.
No, honestly, it's fascinating, and it's not something I've heard of before. Just before we go to another question, during the process, during the contact, do you ever hear clicks or see flashes of light or spirals of light?
No, not to my knowledge.
No, because it's just something that we've experienced here. But no, I just wanted to run it past you. Okay, then, unless you want to continue talking about the implant and the slit, which will go to a few questions.
But the slit's not finished with me, I don't think.
Right. Okay. Questions, Les, please.
Yes, I just want to get this question in. I've just noticed it. It's from Tim Brennan, and Tim is asking, Whitley, do you think angels exist? And if you do so, if you think they are ET or aliens, ET/aliens.
I don't think that way. I don't go past the questions that I can't answer,
No, that's
and that would be going past the question I can't answer. So I can tell you what happens to me. I can describe as best I can how I perceive the things that happen to me. Whether or not those are actually what happened is another unanswerable question. But I can tell you, I'm very good at describing my perceptions. That I can tell you. As to taking a leap and saying these are ETs or these are angels or demons or anything like that, I have not got any information that I could use to give you an answer to those questions.
okay. Do you think that, you know, we've all got a different perception of what these things are or what we're investigating or looking into, but do you think ultimately it's all the same thing?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I have I've interacted with, I think, 5 different forms who had very different ways of interacting with me, some of which the same form had different ways of interacting with me depending on who it was, and also with our own dead and my wife. So that's a lot. It's not all the same thing. I do think this. I think that consciousness is general in the universe. I think that there is an element of consciousness in everything. But I also think that consciousness and intelligence are two different things. That there is a lot in the universe and in the world around us of kind of silent awareness, self awareness that has no intellectual content. And then when you get into the world of the living things, going up from the plants and the protozoa and so forth up to all the way up to man, each level is has more intelligence to connect to this consciousness. And then beyond us, I would guess there's even more.
Yeah. Brilliant. Honestly, that's that's interesting. I shall listen to that again. Okay, Les, another question, please.
Yes, I've got a.
Are you still happy
got a
answering these questions, Whitley?
Are we okay for another couple?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I will do a couple more. I film UFOs. Hi, Whitley. So, apart from your implants, did you ever receive any marks or scars on your body from your experiences?
Yeah, many. I have a problem with. I'm so deeply involved in this that I become very allergic to our world, and I get to the point where the allergies are actually dangerous. But the visitors will show up physically every 6 months or so, and there's a little mark on my right leg, just above the ankle, little round place that will be irritated after they come, and the allergies will be gone for 6 months. And they make 2 little marks on my legs. I could show you pictures of these if I knew how to make this thing. I don't. It's not like Zoom, so I can't. I don't think I can pull up a
Okay.
picture. But in any case, they came about a month ago, and so I'm in allergy heaven right now. I have no allergies. So that's one mark. And another thing they did was early on, they carved 2 little triangles on my arm, one of my arms, And that happened in the experience I referred to earlier in the discussion, when the little girl saw the airplane covered with lights fly through the front yard. Then that after the encounter that night, there were these two triangles engraved on my arm that gradually faded. And so, yeah, I get marks all the time, actually. There's others too, I suppose, that that are not coming to mind at the moment.
The
Okay.
visitors, Whitley, do you think there's an element of, do you think some of them are tricksters?
Yes, I do. I do indeed. And I think this whole thing may have a trickster element to it. We've talked earlier about the difficulty the brain has in resolving impressions that 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 it has no references for. And there's also a report called the Condign Report that was produced in the UK by British intelligence, I forget which arm of British intelligence, and declassified in 1997. And it makes the point that these plasmas, as it calls the UFOs, when someone gets near these plasmas, they can end up remembering things that didn't happen. And I think that's very important to understand, that memory is very malleable naturally. And there is also something here that can induce memories that are not real. And they can, in effect, write a novel in your mind that you think is a real event. That's why people have to be so careful. And we're running around drawing all these conclusions about, someone will show you a star map of where the reptilians come from and the Zetans and this and that. We don't know any of that stuff is true or not. It could be a novel being written by this big trickster that seems to come across poor little old humanity and is having some fun with us.
So do you sort of play with idea then that you could be being tricked in some way with some of these things?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
I would be amazed if I wasn't being. I'm very unsure about especially the childhood experiences.
Yeah. Okay. Just to jump from the questions for a moment and jump from you specifically, because everything's been focused on your story. How can we break the stigma, or how do you think we can break the stigma attached to the whole genre, the whole subject? What would help?
Well, I think that the more our governments admit that this is real, the more that stigma will decline. But I don't think anything else will help. If other things would have helped, they would have helped long ago. But they don't help. In fact, people aren't willing to. They don't want to face this. You know, it's not so hard to think, oh, well, there might be flying saucers flying around. We're used to that now. But to think that something might come out of them and do all this weird stuff to us that we don't understand, no, sir, that's hard to swallow, and people are going to have trouble swallowing it unless they have to.
Yeah. Okay. So if you, based on all the things that you've experienced, and it's a lot to sort of absorb, if you could experience just one more part of this unexplained phenomena, and I realize what would it be? You probably.
I didn't understand the question. Could you say it again?
Based on everything that you've experienced, all the interaction and all the other things that's out there, the people you've spoken to on your fabulous podcast Dreamland and read in Unknown Country, what other part of the phenomena, or any part of unexplained phenomena, would you want to experience or get involved in?
As much as I can.
Right. No, fair
I'm
enough.
very involved in it. And in fact,
No, well,
I
yeah, that goes without saying, but I just wondered if there was something else that interests you that you've not actually.
I would like to have more frequent physical engagement because I'm a physical body. I'm
Yeah,
a physical being, and they don't often engage with me on the physical level, except so fast that I don't really get a chance to feel a sense of interaction.
right.
And I would like that, and I know they can do it. They just don't want to.
Thank
They're
you.
scared. I'm too big and clumsy,
Yeah,
and
th-
they've seen me get really violent, and they think I can't control myself. So,
so they're scared of us, our physicality.
but also, like, there's people who work with them. I know that because I know some of them, but they won't come around here except like at that 4 a.m. deal. I'd like to have dinner with them. I mean, why not just get to more know each other more in a normal way? That's what I would like.
Well, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but we're thinking about it maybe in human terms, and that's just not the way they operate.
Well, it's very frustrating because why not?
Yeah,
I mean, if they're here and they're involved with us, why not do something at least that's on our level?
yeah, yeah. Good
Is
point.
it just too dull, or maybe they're scared of us? I don't know.
So I think I'm going to go to a few questions in a moment, but you touched on Roswell earlier, and
Yeah,
obviously you've got some knowledge of that. And would you give us a few minutes just speaking about?
sure.
Yeah,
My uncle, my father's brother, was in the Air Force, and he was at the Air Materiel Command uh, at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, in 1947, and they brought this debris in from New Mexico, and it became very obvious after they began to try to determine what this was, because their job, it's air materiel. Their job was to figure out what things that had come into our possession from the air were. And there was a great deal of concern because the only operational wing of atomic bombers in the world was stationed in Roswell, New Mexico. And Stalin at that point had 4.5 million soldiers on the on a line between Eastern and Western Europe. And Western analysts were saying that he could reach the English Channel in 6 weeks and possibly cross it. In other words, he could possibly even take England, because the Western powers they'd stood down most of their armies, not realizing he was not planning to do the same. The only thing that kept him from doing this was the fear of those atomic bombs. So that base was really critical. And now something unknown crashes a few miles north of that base. Was it something sent by Stalin? And was it to determine the level of readiness on the base by using sensitive instruments to determine how much radioactive material was actually present on the base? And they would find out not much, because we only had a couple of atomic bombs. That's the one thing Stalin wanted to know and didn't know, was how operational that bomber wing actually was. So it was a huge thing in the Air Force to find out what this was. And this material and the physical remains went racing off to the Air Materiel Command pronto. And as General Exon put it to me in a phone call, he was my uncle's superior officer at the time. He said, everyone from Truman on down knew that what we had was not of this world within 24 hours of our getting it. And they had determined very quickly that these bodies, which were like, as General Exon said, they were like big insects, were not in any way human bodies. And they also determined that these materials were unlike anything the United States could create, and probably also unlike anything the Russians could create, because of the extremely high tensile strength of this material and its thinness. It was thin like a little piece of tissue paper, but you could not fire a bullet through it. And there were also wooden pieces that were the same way. They couldn't be burned, they couldn't be broken, you couldn't fire a gun through them, saw them, anything. But they looked like pieces of balsa. So, and then these bodies, as the general said, were insect-like. They were like insects, big bugs, he said.
Incredible.
So, what have you got there? That's the kind of thing the Air Force is definitely going to keep secret, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're going to close the lid on that, and we're not going to
They
find
closed the lid on it very quickly. The reason they initially closed the lid on it was because they were afraid that this was some kind of a Russian spy craft, and they were terrified. And so they shut the publicity office at the Roswell airfield down pronto. And then when they discovered what it actually was and what they were dealing with, the various generals involved all decided that it was a scout ship for an invasion force, because they had just come off of World War II, and that was their mindset.
Yeah.
It was nothing of the kind. It was what was going on was very much deeper and more complex than that.
It's fabulous. There's so many things at play there, isn't there? You know, so many elements that, well, people were never meant to know. Whitley, we look like we've got about 10 minutes left. So I know we've got lots of questions. So providing you're still okay for 10 minutes.
Okay, but I do have to leave because I have a meeting at the top of the hour.
Right, we'll definitely be done in 10 minutes time. So that's just before top of the hour. So I'll ask Les if we can do these questions, and all I can say is thank you very much for giving us your time. Les?
Yes, some great questions in tonight from the people, everybody in the chat, and unfortunately time is going to pass us by on this one, because let's have a look. I'm just finding the questions now. So jumping about a bit here, Whitley, Umbraman, in relation to our physical plane, where is Anne and those that pass? All the people that die, including
I don't
Anne.
think that they are confined in the physical world the same way we are. I think the body is confining, and that once you pass, your scope of being becomes quite different. And it doesn't happen immediately. You gradually get used to being in another level of reality, which is much less physically bounded than this one. That would be my best way of putting it.
Thank you.
I've been out of my body a few times. I tried to learn to do it myself, but speaking of tricksters, there was basically no way. I bought a book by Robert Monroe called Journeys Out of the Body, because when I was first talking about this to people, someone said maybe it was the out of body experience. I never heard of that. So I learned, and I was trying one night to use the instructions in his book as to get out of my body, and I succeeded. I thought I'd done it myself, but it was actually the little gray people who facilitated it. And I was a totally coherent presence. I could move around the room. I could go out into through the window and the wall into the front yard and stuff. And I thought, well, I've learned how to do this now. I'm going to do this a lot more. Interestingly enough, the cats, Annie was asleep, but the cats were just watching me like I was walking around the room. So when your cats are watching something walking around the room and you can't see it, it's liable to be your dead grandmama or something like that.
Okay,
In any case, I eventually went back in my body, and I never was able to get out of it again on my own, but I was taken out 2 other times.
right.
So, and they were pretty dramatic because I was seen by other people, and 3 other times actually. And I never had that sort of breaking out into a complete non-physical state, though. I was always a coherent entity that couldn't be seen except by the people the visitors wanted to see me to see me. One of them was the broadcaster in this country, the podcaster Linda Moulton Howe. This was years ago, and we were friends. She woke up in the night and saw me hanging over a potted plant in her bedroom, and it scared the hell out of her and pissed her off. I was terribly embarrassed. I knew I was in a woman's bedroom, but I couldn't tell who it was. And then I got this furious phone call from Linda. "What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah." And I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't do it on purpose." But she wouldn't talk to me for a long time after that. I
Really?
don't blame her. I mean,
Come as a
you
shock.
get a ghost in your room and it's somebody you know,
Mm.
especially if you're a woman and it's a man, bedroom, middle of the night.
Yeah, that's something to think about. Yeah. More questions, please, Les.
I've probably got time for a couple more
Yeah,
questions, and one from our moderator, Deborah Singleton. Did the people who put the implants into your ear look human or alien?
No, they were human. It was a woman and a man. I'd recognize them anywhere. The man had a beard. It was red. He was bearded. And the woman was smaller, and I could tell you exactly what she looked like. I could probably describe her to one of those police identification people. I would recognize either one of them immediately if I ever saw them again. They were people, and the voice from the backyard sounded very military. It was, this very official, quietly concerned voice goes, "Condition red," like that, "Condition red." So it was a human. They were all human. There may have been something else in the room. I've never been sure, but the 2 that I saw clearly were human, apparently.
Yeah. Thank you.
And our final question, I think, will be from Michael Adams. And Michael is asking, did Whitley have missing time?
I have missing time quite frequently. The most recent case of missing time was I was going to meet an attorney who works in this field and is very heavily involved in it, and a mutual friend. And I hadn't seen the attorney in many years. And we were going to spend the afternoon and evening together. And I was in a hurry to have my lunch because they were going to come in about a half hour. And this happened. I walked into the kitchen, and suddenly there was a power failure, and the lights all went out, and everything went out. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to get my lunch made in time. But then it all came back on again immediately, and I thought, well, fine. I will be able to have my lunch. But then I looked at my phone, which hadn't gone off, and the light flashing on the microwave oven indicated it's something like 12:02, but it was 12:23 on the phone. And I had not had any perception of it's the slightest break in time. But in fact, 22 minutes had passed while I was apparently just standing there in that room. That's missing time.
Yeah.
And the reason the missing time happened was that they were very interested in this lawyer, I guess, and whoever created the missing time, and maybe they had questions they wanted me to ask him or something like that. And there was this period of missing time.
Fabulous.
I didn't notice anything unusual in our time together. We had a nice evening and afternoon and evening.
Well, on that note, and I do apologise to people that have got all these questions, because I know there's a load of questions, and we might address some with your permission next week, Whitley. I know you won't be here, but I won't be saying anything that's out of character, I assure you. But can you just tell a few people about Unknown Country and the podcast before you say your goodbyes to us, please?
Okay, my podcast is called Dreamland. It's been going since 1998, every week, so you can count on it being there. My website is unknowncountry.com. That's where you can find the podcast. And the website also offers a subscription level, which gives you more access to different things. And you're more than welcome to subscribe. I would love it. It's not expensive. And that's about it. And I'm working on the audiobook and so forth of the new edition of Communion, which will be out next month. And then beyond that, there will be a book called Them, which is about the visitors that will be out in the fall, I hope.
And the books are available where?
Oh, Amazon is the easiest place, or they don't sell much in bookstores, but online, on the web, you can get them.
Well, on that note, Whitley, I really thank you for giving us just about 2 hours of your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to meeting up with you in a few weeks' time. And
thanks. See you then.
You will do. You take care. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone, for contributing. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, thank you very much. Our guest tonight, Whitley Strieber, great guest. I've got to thank Paul Sinclair also. Next week, we'll have another good guest on, I guess. But it's been an honour and a privilege to talk to Whitley Strieber tonight, and fascinating to hear the accounts that led up to all the book writing that he achieved from there on in. So I've got to say thanks for everybody to joining us tonight. Thanks, Debbie, for moderating. Thank you for the super chat, and I really, really apologise for the questions that I didn't get asked tonight to Whitley, and unfortunately we only have that 2 hour slot. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next week.